May is Mental Health Month. And in broadcasting, where the world is turned upside down with jobs being eliminated, people having to find new jobs, uproot families, change careers, some people leaving our medium, I hear from many things have never been worse. This has to be the toughest time in media or broadcasting. And yet, I'm sure it depends on exactly where you are in broadcasting or media and when it's happening, whether it's happening to you or not. There's certainly been lots of tough times over the years, but when it's happening to you and it's happening right now, it is a critically tough time. How are you seeing where we are in the industry right now? And what is your feeling as to how people in general, who, whether they've lost their job or not, are thinking about their future, should be concerned in regard to mental health?
What these individuals that have lost their jobs or thinking about changing careers are experiencing right now are probably symptoms of grief. Grief and loss is not necessarily about the death of an individual, a person, or an animal or pet. It's maybe the death of a career, or the death of an industry, or the loss of a job, or the loss of a home and a community. And yes, I agree that maybe it's not the best of times for the broadcast industry, but it's certainly not the worst of times. It, radio in itself has been through so many different renaissances and evolutions that there's no reason why it can't now. However, these symptoms of grief, which are the denial, the bargaining, the anger, the depression, those are like the five, and then there's acceptance, are preventing people from actually being able to recover and improve and move forward. So, what do I see as the future? The mental health aspect definitely needs to be addressed for sure.
How do you, or what would you advise those individuals who lost their job that are focused on the five different points you just said? How do they get to that point of acceptance?
Sometimes acceptance is just accepting that it's over. That's a hard thing to come to terms with, or accepting that you have to move. And I think that would be in this instance the first step. Let's accept what's happening here. And how do you move on from that? Symptoms of grief are not linear. You don't go through one to the other to the next to the next. It's like an infinity circle where you're flashing in and out. So you might accept the loss at one point and then be angry about it later. And then maybe you're bargaining and saying, if only I would have done this, or if the company would have done that, or the industry would have done this, things would be different. And so I think the point is that there's no easy fix. There's no fast tracking your way through this. You have to go through the emotions of it. And that's what I always talk to my clients about. You got to feel the feels. Right now, I think a lot of people might be in that denial phase, that it is maybe not as bad as it seems or as bad as it seems. Which stage are you in?
Interesting. One of the things that I always tried to do when I had a role at a large company was to say to those with hiring and firing power, when you're hiring someone, make sure you do a really great job of interviewing them, make sure that they're the person that will work best for you in this particular situation, because you don't want to have to fire them. When you terminate them, you're not just terminating them, you're terminating their family and their circle of friends. And that, I believe, comes from empathy and having been fired in my career when you realize that's there. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you're counseling or coaching an executive who has a tough time handling that monumental responsibility of holding someone's future in their hands?
Yeah, that's a really big one because I have not run into any executive that has had to be in that role that enjoys it. It's probably the worst part of being in leadership is when you have to let somebody go or terminate them or lay them off. That nobody likes it. It's an icky feeling. And these are the kinds of details of your job that you have to just take one moment at a time and breathe and allow yourself to have that empathy and compassion for that individual you are letting go of. And that's the first step, really. It's hard. It's not an easy job.
So let's go back to being the person who's being fired.
Okay.
So someone has been terminated and you're in your first session with them. Walk me through how that discussion goes, how you take them from listening to the situation and getting to where you're offering them advice.
A therapist is different than a coach, whereas a therapist, when you're listening to them talk about it, you're going to be pulling out a lot of the symptoms of the grief that they're experiencing. So I would have to go in that direction. You let them tell their story, first of all, because they are angry. They are in denial. They are going to be bargaining, saying, if only I would have done this, maybe my job would have been different or I wouldn't have got fired. Or if only there could be a list of things. I would listen to them first and let them vent. That's what they really need to do is you need to vent. You need to be able to get it out. So I would encourage anyone who's been in that firing position, find somebody that can hold your vent safe for you and not go spreading rumors about what you're saying because you need to get it out. You don't want to bury it. You don't want to leave it be and act as if there's nothing wrong. The next thing would be we'd have to focus on your mental health and how are you going to manage it now? What do you want to do? And I think that's the first thing is that, okay, what now? And a lot of people, they just need a little bit of time to breathe and recover from the loss. And how much time that takes is really dependent on your life situation. Do you need a job right away or did you get enough severance that you could wait a few weeks to recover from the stress of it, from the shock of losing your job?
And then how do you get them to accept, or how do you help them plan on what's next and the steps they'll take to get to what's next?
I like to do a needs assessment in radio sales or programming or anything. You want to find out what the needs are. It's all pretty relative and or integrates together, finding out what their interests are. If you can't leave the community because your kids are in school or whatever, then maybe it's time to you go to another radio station or you go to another media company. But if you can leave the area and you're free to go, then that's an element that we would want to discuss. So really we would want to, what's your lifestyle like? What do you want your lifestyle to look like? And at this point, is there a chance that you can look forward to whatever the next step might be? So I just basically find out what is it that you really need to do? Do you need to get a job right now because you have kids to support, or can you wait a little bit and breathe and find out what else you might be interested in? Is there another company that you could move forward to? Do you have friends in the industry? There's so many different avenues to go, and I can see why the people in this position on both sides are going to be conflicted and not really sure yet because the initial shock of it is what's preventing you from being able to move forward. So we got to get through the shock.
Yeah, interestingly, you had mentioned earlier about a comparison with radio and saying that people are like a radio station, a human transmitter,
Yeah.
receiver. Explain it to me.
Part of my graduate studies to become a therapist, we learned different techniques and different methods. So I became a big believer in neuroscience and our human energy field. And we study that with heart math, which is a technique that I certified in. And heart math demonstrates that we have a human energy field that emits out of us like 3 feet. And your heart has more sensitivity than your brain does. And it transmits a signal. So if you're depressed, you're constricted. And if you're happy, you're expanding. And this is true with your emotions. And so when you can shift your emotions in your brain from negative to positive, it's changing the chemistry in your brain, which is our natural heroin. And so it feels good. The brain wants to start looking for it. So the human energy field, then you are transmitting a signal out of your body. And so that's what I mean by we are human transmitters. You are like a radio station, and the way you think is your programming. So if you're thinking negative, you are programming and broadcasting a negative signal, a negative message, a negative attitude. But when you shift your thoughts, like flipping the format or changing the radio dial, you're changing your format, your internal thinking, Now you're more positive, you're a little bit more uplifting, you're happier, and the people around you are going to feel that signal that you are emitting out of your body. And so that's what I mean by we are like a radio station.
Yeah. You mentioned statistics in the notes that you gave me, mental health statistics and why it matters. Our operation. What is that? Share that with me.
Even before COVID, and the statistics are pretty much roughly the same, about 25% of Americans suffer from anxiety and depression. Some of it treated, some of it not treated. But when you think about that's 1 in 4 people. 1 in 4 people in America are plagued by symptoms of depression and anxiety. So when you think about it at your radio station and say you have a staff of 8, let's just do the math easy. That means 2 of your staff are already not working in a full 100% capacity. So if you have a staff of 25, that means, you got 8 people that aren't really performing very well for you because they're already plagued with symptoms of anxiety, depression. Maybe they're calling out sick, or they're not showing up to work, or they're quitting fast, or they have anxiety. They're too nervous to go on the air or make changes or go out and make a sales call, or they're frustrated. And without the proper mental health tools to work through it with their emotions, then it is affecting your bottom line because they're not working to their full potential. Maybe they're looking for another job. Maybe they're trying to take time off work.
Or suddenly you're without a job.
Mm-hmm.
If there is such a thing where you'd say you need to evaluate the situation, come to grips with where you are.
Right. I say that fear is the #1 obstacle to success. So whether you've lost your job or not, you've got to learn how to walk through the fear and face it. What does they say about fear? It's false evidence appearing real. So when we can reduce the impact of fear and face our fear, that would be the first thing. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? You've lost your job. Okay. Does it mean that you're not any good at it? Does it mean you didn't do a good enough job? That does it mean you need to be out of radio? Not necessarily. So let's face the fear. What are you afraid of? And then once you can identify what your fear is, then we can work on flipping how you feel about it, because that fear is a negative emotion. So we want to flip it to the positive. So what's the opposite of fear? Okay. Love. Now, do you still love radio? Do you still love the industry? Do you still love what you did? Yes, I do. Okay, good. Then now what? Now let's find a way to either reinvent yourself or reinvent the industry or do something to help out. But if that question gets to where, no, I don't love the industry, I actually hate it now, then you have no business being in it, because you and it are going to fail. So it's really going to come down to facing your fear, owning it, and then flipping it. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of making a change? Are you afraid of getting out? Are you afraid of getting out of this industry because you're afraid you're going to miss something? Or are you afraid to stay in it or fearing that you're a dinosaur? So
Oh,
it really is going to come down to just like facing your fear. What is your fear of it?
yeah. I had a lunch not long ago with a friend of mine who just retired. And he said to me, "Are you ever going to retire?" And I said, "I hope that I don't. I hope that I'm doing this all of my life because I love it so much. But I do realize that I have defined my life by my job."
Yeah.
And so
Most men do.
yeah,
Men, that's very typical with men. Men define their success by what they do for a living.
yeah.
Women define their success usually by the relationships that they establish.
Interesting.
Yeah. When I was writing Dead Air, I had come up with the concept of dead air, of the stations being taken over and the transmitters. And so I had all the technology that I was really doing the research on to figure it out. But then I had to create characters. I had to give them like something to do. I had to make real people out of what was happening here. And that's when I tapped into my knowledge of psychology. Like, what is happening with these individuals that's going on right now? This is a crisis. This is something they're going to be very afraid of. They're going to have a lot of fear. And I just started giving them a diagnosis. There's no real people in this book, so I'm not violating anything. I said, okay, Mike Harris is going to have anxiety. and Jackie Sure is going to have some low self-esteem. And Roy Longley is going to have somewhat of a narcissistic personality disorder, but I just gave him narcissistic tendencies. And then Gunnar Jeffries, he's our stable guy in the whole thing, but he's fearful because he's got kids in the audience that could be affected by what's going on with what's happening in the storyline. So what I did was I gave each of them a diagnosis and then just played it out through that. And so the novel actually goes through this fear-based event and how all these people had to overcome their fear. And even at the end of the novel, a couple of them were really willing to make a major shift in their lives because of it, because of how they grew through it. It's a psychological thriller. So I put psychology into it with real diagnosable issues and concerns. And one of my ARC readers was a psychotherapist and said, very well researched, good job. So if you ever want to know what it's like for someone to have anxiety, pay attention to the Mike Harris character. He's got anxiety, but I don't come around and say he's anxious. No. Yeah.
Tell me about your technical background, because I want to talk about you as a psychotherapist.
Okay.
And I also want to acknowledge why you're so good for this article because of your broadcast background.
The first 17 years of my career was spent with my dad owning and operating our own radio station. So I got a lot of technical experience out of that, but actually the overall operations of a radio station. And then since 2000, my dad and I transitioned into a consulting firm, Orchard Media Services, where we were with the ABIP. So we were inspecting radio and television stations for 20 years. So I spent a ton of time with engineers up on transmitter sites and in master control and in the studios, asking a ton of questions. And so that's how I gained a lot of this engineering expertise. And the origin of the story actually began working with engineers up on Mount Wilson and over again for years. And so that's how Mount Wilson became the main setting for Dead Air.
And then let me go back and ask this question. Have you seen times that had this much trauma in them for radio people in the past? Or if you were measuring, where are we now versus other times? And I guess also part of it is mental health is talked about openly now. Thank God. For the longest time, it was hidden. My mother's generation would never, as I think I mentioned to you, I have had years of counseling. And my mother's generation would think that I'm crazy then because I did that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if there's necessarily been a good job done with reducing the stigma of mental illness, but maybe that's something that radio can actually help is help reduce the stigma beyond more than just public service announcements. But as far as what's going on in the industry, no. In my career, I've not really ever seen it as sad as it is, but I also think that there's a lot of negativity, and it isn't a matter of that radio can't reinvent or stay relevant. I think that chasing the next shiny object is a distraction from what radio is and what radio could be. I just recorded and interviewed a podcast with some small market independent radio broadcasters who are still old fashioned, old school, involved in their community. And they notice what's going on in the outside world, but they are so involved in what they're doing individually in their market, not even concerned about what's going on out there, that they're hardly impacted. And they have such a positive attitude about what they're doing. However, their mindset about what's going on in the industry as a whole causes them to feel disconnected. And I think that radio as an industry, and this is just an opinion, my humble opinion, as a 40-year veteran or longer, geez, it needs to be more exciting again and not be chasing the statistics and the data. Rather, you need to chase that one individual listener, because that one individual listener matters. And they are collectively a large group of people. And no, is it any better than it was before? No. Is it worse than it was before? Only because I think that maybe the mental health issues of the anxiety and the depression and the stress of what's happening in the industry is preventing people from being able to think clearly. to be able to come up with solutions to their problems. And that's where you need to start. You start with changing the way you're thinking about it, changing the way you talk about it, change the way you look at it. And when you can do that, then you can change its course. Where do
Yeah.
we start? Where do we start? Start with gratitude.
Yeah.
Because gratitude is the ultimate positive emotion. And it's not, you don't go through life with rose colored glasses on. Practicing gratitude means being thankful for the simple thing today that happened. Even if it means I got all the green lights on the way to the office, be grateful for that. Or somebody opened the door for me when I was walking into the coffee shop, be grateful for that. Because those little incremental things will help change that brain chemistry, which will help change your mindset and your mood. That's why I say it's like our natural heroin, because once your brain chemistry starts to shift, you get increased dopamine and all these other chemicals that are shifting in your brain because of your emotions. Your brain will start liking it and looking for more of that, just like you would look for any drug. And that's what it does. So starting with gratitude is really a good place to start.